Koski as the author. I believe the title is Rebel Flag. This is chapter 5 and 6 is the reading. So chapter 5, The Shadow of States' Rights. At 10:18 a.m. on July 17th, 1948, in the Brigham City Auditorium, students from several Southern colleges and universities serving as delegates to the States' Rights Party Convention carried the Confederate battle flag into the convention hall as other delegates stood silently with hats over their hearts. The moment announced the marriage between the flag's emerging pop culture status and its ideological roots. Once again, in the 1940s, as in the 1890s, or the 1860s, the Confederate battle flag was the chosen symbol of people dedicated to defending states' rights as a means to preserve a social order founded upon white supremacy. Okay, so here we see the political movement of states' rights in 1948 being immediately identified with white supremacy. And the battle flag of the Confederate Army is the symbol, the chosen symbol for that movement. It's still going on. It's in 1948. The battle flag originally is from, 1860 or 1861. In the 1860s, white supremacy meant slavery. In 1948, it meant legalized segregation. The battle flag was not the official symbol of the National States Rights Democratic Party, which the headline writers dubbed the Dixiecrat Party. Interesting. I did not realize that the Dixiecrat Party's actual name is the National States Rights Democratic Party. In fact, party leaders shunned symbols that implied a strictly regional identity. Okay, so this is talking about the split in the Democratic Party between Dixiecrats, or Southern Democrats, which traditionally opposed Republicans, which were the party of Lincoln, and traditionally the Southern Democrats were the ones that were extremely racist and actively hurtful to the South and minorities and African Americans within it. And, somewhere along the line, there's what's called the Southern Strategy, which, I would like to say is absolute historical fact, but that's one of the techniques that the opposition can use that from a confident man that the South will rise again. Yeah. One of the techniques that is used by people in positions where they're the minority politically, because, of a wide variety of reasons, is they keep the controversy going, right? So they can just say, well, it's debated whether or not the Southern Strategy is a real thing. And that is one of the ways of not letting something be all the way correct or all the way socially accepted as true, is you just stand in a corner and yell that it's not true, even though all of the scientific data says that it is true. You see this for global warming, we see this for evolution, we see this for the modern COVID crisis, anti-vax movement, or rather, I should say, the anti-vax movement from the 90s that against, autism, that vaccines cause autism, and now, again, it's redux in the COVID crisis. There's a great YouTube video by H-Bomber guy that goes into the roots of the anti-vaccine craze and scare and delusion, and where it comes from specifically in Britain, and then moved, of course, into America. Okay, but let's keep going. Dixiecrat Party leaders shunned symbols that implied a strictly regional identity, like the Confederate flag. Significantly, it was party supporters, primarily young men, who often waved the flag for Dixiecrats. The same young people who made the flag more visible as a symbol of collegiate hijinks and regional pride were the ones who thrust it into an increasingly ideological political arena. So this is the position of college students and universities in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s as centers of ideological and political change, which is, it's kind of students' job, basically, is to take all these ideas, synthesize their identity and meaning for the modern era that they will inevitably participate in and lead, and then kind of translate that forward, which is what we're doing now, right now, actually, by doing the homework that our professors assign us. The great cycle of human minds and narratives continues. All right. This coincidence inevitably tainted the ostensibly innocent uses of the flag and established a well-defined pattern for subsequent decades. Southern white disaffection from the Democratic Party had been building for more than a decade. Professor Clever Diversion. I mean, I have to do a huge amount more work in order to get that title. But thank you. I mean, that is what I'm trying to do. The problem is it's a lot, and it's not to be taken lightly. It's something that is, the more you get close to it and the more you go into it, the more detailed and weighty and seriously you can take it. Now, not everyone has to take it that seriously, but I believe that it should be taken seriously, because people died for this, in the South, people were lynched for this, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, Malcolm X was killed, the FBI killed Black Party members in their beds, in their homes in the 60s. This is not a happy, fun time joke. One of the things I like to say about history often is you need to understand you're walking in a graveyard. So that's how we need to treat it. And when we say funny words or funny cultural jokes, Holocaust jokes were really popular in high school, in the 2006, 2007s. And they were funny because, it's so atrocious. Shock comedy was at its height. Sarah Silverman was at the top of her career. Dane Cook would be soon to rise in the comedy spectrum. But when you grow up and then you start taking college courses that are about the Holocaust, and you start talking with Holocaust survivors and dealing with what that actually is, not just as a high school thing that you do for a week, but as a multiple year project that you have to take inside yourself, it gets a lot different, and it gets a lot I mean, I hesitate to use the word maturity, but there is a level where the joke wears off, and you have to acknowledge the depression that comes from living in a world where the most technologically advanced Central European country in history did that with their whole society and thought that that was a good idea. And that danger of no joke actual Nazis taking over one of the strongest, most understanding one of the most technologically advanced European powers at that time period, and how close that was, how recent, genuinely how recent 1940 is to the modern era. It kind of supersedes those internet jokes. That's why I never allow people to use the internet joke of oh, well, you just bring up, time the historians speeches until they bring up Hitler. It's because every single 20th and 21st century historian should be bringing up Hitler in almost every single context and conversation. It's because it's that significant to history. You really don't you don't get to skip it. It's not a skippable part of recent modern political or military or social history. And I think that people deserve to be continually shocked about that every single day of their lives because it was a massive global trauma. In fact, Professor Zeeler, the professor at CU Boulder, who is like one of the only military historians at CU Boulder, has that book that I've been reading, which is called Annihilation. And the opening chapter of it is how utterly horrific World War II was, especially compared to all other wars. In many ways, it was, because of technology and because of the numbers involved, one of the most horrible wars in all of global history, because it incorporated many different wars. You know, he likes to say that, like, it's worse than World War I, and many people think the opposite. Many people think that it is somehow better than World War I. And a lot of that is because they don't understand the Eastern Front. Okay, we have to continue. Anyway, so yes, Southern white disaffection from the Democratic Party had been building for more than a decade, as Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry Truman, two Democratic recent presidents from the 1940s, Franklin D. Roosevelt for World War II, funny enough, it does come up, and Harry Truman, the person who authorized the use of nuclear weapons on Japan, for good reason, tilted towards the party's liberal wing at the expense of the conservative South. So the Democratic Party is getting more liberal during this time period, and the conservative segregationist South feels locked out of the party, which, you know, they are, and they will continue to be in as modern American history, by which I mean from like 1940 to the present, moves forward in a progressive manner as time moves forward. The more conservative parts of the country are primed to feel left out because they are being left out, because they should be left out. Those ideas should die. You don't just get to continue to be segregationist up until the 90s. It's not okay. All right. The African American vote in northern cities was becoming increasingly important to the National Democratic Party, and Truman responded by supporting the Civil Rights Movement. In 1947, he appointed a Civil Rights Commission, and early 1948, he endorsed the recommendations embodied by the Commission's report to secure these rights. So this is before the 50s. It's important to note that, like, many people treat the 50s and the 60s as very separate from each other, but this is the end of the 40s, acknowledging World War II, people coming back into these spaces, and there's a whole class you could make about social change's relationship with warfare. After World War II, many of the boundaries of social occupation, especially economically, which then naturally translates to socially and thus politically, wear down. They break down because all the white men are out fighting the war, and all the jobs still need to be done back at home. And so you get women in the workplace, you get far more African American involvement, and that is the source of lots of horrific contention. If you want to look up the Zoot Suit riots in LA in the 1940s, partly due to World War II, and California history has that in spades, where, you know, the white people are busy, but they still resent other people coming in and taking their spots psychologically. They, of course, want them to go and do it because they need the jobs done, but then they love to complain about it after the fact. All right, so let's move on. Further confirming that he did not want to count on the support of Southern conservatives, Truman, in late July 1948, issued Executive Order 9981, which mandated equal treatment within the U.S. Armed Forces and anticipated their integration. All right, so 1948 is after World War II. It's important to note, for my paper, what I'm doing, which is Black officers in the Civil War, this would have been a really great issue, executive order to issue in 1864 or in 1860. That would have been really progressive. That would have been great because we did have Black officers in the U.S. Army, but if you go to the U.S. Army website, it says that they didn't until 1877. And by which I mean commissioned officers, not non-commissioned officers. There was huge amounts of black non-commissioned officers. They were totally fine with that, but commissioned officers, that's a different story. All right. At the end of 1948, Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia, liberal delegates introduced a platform plan committing to the party to continue efforts to eradicate all religious, racial, social, and economic discrimination. All right. The convention approved a milder plan condemning the president's civil rights program, or commending the president's civil rights program, and calling upon Congress to support Truman in guaranteeing civil rights, including the right to full and equal political participation, but directly calling out Jim Crow literacy tests for the South designed to keep out African American voters. Minneapolis Mayor Herbert H. Humphrey exhorted his fellow Democrats that the time had arrived for the Democratic Party to get out of the shadow of states' rights and walk forthrightly into the bright sunshine of human rights. So this is interesting, right? Using the language of your enemy to do states' rights. What he could have said was the shadow of racism, the shadow of segregation. But I don't know if you even could get away with that kind of political talk at the time. As we'll see in the next paragraph. In response to this obvious challenge, the Mississippi delegation and part of the Alabama delegation walked out of the convention hall. According to some reports, the Alabama delegates carried Confederate flags. Even after the dissenters left the building, the convention was contentious. Okay, so real quick, when you carry a Confederate flag to a federal United States delegation, that already shouldn't be allowed. You really have to be careful putting Confederate ideology back into federal ideology, right? It's the United States government. The Confederate flag is secessionist. It is the people who wanted to break off as a separate nation from the United States, and they're participating in the United States government still. So let's just keep that in mind. Even after the dissenters left the building, the convention was contentious. Nominating roll call began with Alabama. Speaking for the remaining delegates, Senator Lister Hall paraphrased William Jennings Bryan's powerful 1896 Cross of Gold speech, warning his fellow Democrats of the North, West, and East not to crucify the South on the cross of civil rights. You cannot elect a Democratic president without the votes of the South. He then nominated Georgia Senator Richard B. Russell. Pandemonium then broke out in the convention hall. There are yells, and the rebel flag is working overtime, wrote a Christian Science Monitor reporter. Cowbells ring. Waved back at them are the Truman placards of other states. A band struck up Dixie. Spearheaded by the Mississippi and Alabama delegations, the bolt from the Democratic Convention was scripted during many months of preparation, and plans for the climactic moment included the symbolic use of Confederate flags. Okay, so the Dixiecrats have been planning this for a long time. This is at the convention to re-elect Truman as the president, I think. I think it's midterm for Truman, who is currently the Democratic president. And the fact that the convention is nominating someone else is a big deal. That's something that politically is very rude to do. It's essentially overtly stating that there isn't unity within the party. In Jackson, 4,000 white Mississippians had gathered on February 12th, Lincoln's birthday, to sing Dixie, wave Confederate flags, and adopt resolutions denouncing Truman's recent civil rights proposals. Sometimes it's really easy to see when you're on the wrong side of history. Sometimes it's just obvious. It's just pretty clear. It's amazing to me that these people exist and are walking around doing jobs and thinking and like being successful and getting money for racist ideas. Like, it's weird that that could be prosperous to do evil. I guess it's not that weird. In Christian ideology, the devil's always tempting people with money. All right, let's go. Even the newly elected governor, Fielding Wright, held a small battle flag as he entered the auditorium. The self-declared states' rights Democrats condemned the federal government's civil rights proposals and urged all true white Democrats to convene in Jackson to plot a course of resistance. Gee, that sounds familiar. True white Democrats. No true Scotsman can deal with this fallacy. All right, this conference occurred in early May. On the day it opened, the streets of Mississippi's capital reportedly were bedecked with Confederate flags. The day before, Governor Wright gave a radio address in which he told the state's blacks, "If any of you have become so deluded as to want to enter our white schools, patronize our hotels and cafes, enjoy social equality with the whites, then kindness and true sympathy requires me to advise you to make your home in some other state than Mississippi." Wow. So deluded as to want to enter our white schools. Interesting that they phrase it as kindness and true sympathy. That they're doing something good. They're expressing Christian kindness, Christian sympathy, Christian generosity to them, to tell them to leave their homes and jobs and families. You know, just how nice it is in the South. Never forget that Southern hospitality, right? Where they tell all the black people to leave the state. That's fun. All right, South Carolina Governor Strom Thurmond delivered a keynote address that anticipated the one he would give in Brigham 2 months later, warning the federal government not to force integration on the South. The Jackson meeting also resolved that if the Democratic National Convention nominated Truman or any other unacceptable candidate, the meeting would reconvene in Birmingham. So they're threatening to leave, basically. They're threatening to completely secede. The Democratic rebels gambled that they could capture the party apparatus in several southern states and, by denying both major parties sufficient electoral votes, then throw the presidential election into the House of Representatives. Gathering in Birmingham at July 16th, the Dixiecrats adopted a platform that answered Herbert Humphrey's challenge with a strong reaffirmation of states' rights as embodied in the 10th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The platform appealed to the resistance to the civil rights agenda on the basis that it was a form of totalitarianism that threatened the integrity of the states and the basic rights of the citizens. This is where the states' rights ideology really comes forward. Late 1948. All through that summer. July 1948. Not often covered in many classes. But yeah. The Dixiecrats were not reluctant to state bluntly, however, that we stand for the segregation of the races and the racial integrity of each race, and we oppose the elimination of segregated employment by federal bureaucrats called for by the misnamed Civil Rights Program. Yeah, so that's a direct quote. They're like very clear. It's great that they clearly state how racist they are. That's like the best part. The Birmingham Convention nominated Strom Thurmond for president and Fielding Wright for vice president. Strom Thurmond is just a good person to remember in general during this time period, as you know, one of the head names that you should mention if you're talking about states' rights, and by that we mean segregation. 1900s segregation. direct segregation. And that's the thing, right, about progress, is they had segregation, and that was fine all the way through the 1800s, and then suddenly in the 1900s, then we have to change it. So they're complaining about change again, which is what you find conservatives doing all the time. All right, so Thurmond reportedly strode to the dais to deliver his acceptance speech, escorted by the Stars and Stripes and by a Confederate battle flag. So both. You get to have both. You get to have the American flag and the Confederate battle flag. And he said no true Southerner could fail to answer the call of his people. Thurmond told the overflowing, enthusiastic convention. Again, we see this word true Southerner, true South. And by what we mean by true South, we mean racist South. He then delivered his infamous warning that there's not enough troops in the army to force the Southern people to break down segregation and admit the Negro race into our theaters, our swimming pools, into our homes, and into our churches. Yeah, so imagine being black and dating his daughter, right? That'd be fun. You want to just go ahead and put yourself in that psychological position. The state delegations that came to Birmingham consisted of some Southern Democrat regulars, but also many college students who supported the Dixiecrat Rebellion. According to one report, convention delegates included the students from Alabama College, Alabama Polytechnic, Birmingham Southern College, Cumberland University, Georgia Tech, Howard College, Loyola of the South, Mississippi State University, and the University of Alabama, the University of Georgia, University of Tennessee, and the University of Virginia. So Tennessee showing up again as absolutely part of the South for all you people in Nashville and country music, pretending that country music isn't Southern music. It is. It definitely is. The Aniston, yeah, I have a recent private grudge against like very specific country songs that harken back to their like national heritage and pride and their like family name and stuff like that. And I think that's pretty much directly a cover to have Southern Lost Cause ideology alive and well in the American music industry. But that's okay. I mean, it's not okay. That's just present. It doesn't have to be that if you don't interpret it that way. If you're not a bad person, if you're not actively racist, then yeah. All right, the Aniston, Alabama Star commemorated... Okay, I guess I have to follow that up. The same dog whistle can be used by people who aren't racist and people who are racist. And by dog whistle, I mean a piece of information or cultural ideology that for one group stands for one thing and for another group stands for another thing. So like the OK symbol that Trump famously used all the time is a alt-right, white supremacist internet symbol that is in use. And to some people it means okay, and to other people it means, obviously a racist dog whistle. Alright, the Star commented that the gathering was more like a Roman holiday than a convention. Really? It provided irreconcilables a chance to blow off steam and afforded the college boys and girls an opportunity to get out of summer school and join in the hijinks that characterized the parade. Get out of summer school. Interesting. The largest delegation was from the University of Mississippi, and it was these students with whom reports credited with bringing the Confederate flag into the convention hall. Certainly, the university community was proud to send off 55 delegates to Birmingham. After a mass meeting of states' rights enthusiasts, the student delegates posed for photographs in the Birmingham hotel lobby, standing in front of the battle flag and wearing their Colonel Rebel black hats. However, the students denied vehemently that they had brought the flag or the hats with them to the convention hall. Quoting extensively from newspaper reports linking them to the flag, the students responded that they did not bring the flags to the Birmingham City Auditorium. They admitted that they did yell, "To hell with Truman and the states' rights by damn." Instead, it may have been students from Birmingham Southern who paraded the flag in front of the cameras on July 17th, 1948. Interesting that they want to pass that particular hot potato. So they're for states' rights, but they have at least enough political consciousness not to say that they brought the Confederate flag. Regardless of just which students waved the Confederate flags on that day, there's a clear connection between the battle flags that appeared on college campuses and the flags associated with the Dixiecrat Party. It is tempting to conclude that the Dixiecrats' association with the flag was devoid of ideological content, because the flag wavers were primarily college students who had become accustomed to waving that flag at football games and fraternity parties. Well, I mean, I guess if they're just 23, they might... It's funny that, like, we expect so much out of college students because they're, like, in the midst of being one of the most educated people at that generation, where everything is fresh. You know, they just recently read much of their homework. They're up on many of the modern ideas and arguments. And then also they're like 21. They're literally like 22-year-old people. And of course, whether society respects 22-year-olds or 21-year-olds has changed and will continue to change. You know, many Army recruits for World War II were also younger, and they seem to get respect in some way. By what I mean is, like, in each decade, they just kind of decide how much to respect young people. And sometimes it's a lot, sometimes it's not. You know, we'll see with the hippie movement in the 1960s just how much respect they get. Granted, they do make a lot of noise, and people pay attention to that, and people pay attention to them, but I don't know, it's very hard to lead a whole movement when you're 19. I usually need someone older to do that. The testimony of the student delegates and the use of the flag during the May meeting in Jackson contradicted this explanation. Okay, so by way of explanation, let's see. He was the most visible leader of the American Civil Rights Movement in 1955. He was assassinated in 1968, and he was born in 1929. So 30 to 25 to 55. It's probably 26 at least. 30, 40. 50, 55. Yeah. So a lot of his stuff started, you know, King led the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott, and he died when he was age 39 in 1968. So, yeah, I mean, mid-20s, late 20s. I don't know. I guess you start whenever you can start. "1963 was the March on Washington, where he delivers his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, and at that time he was let's see, 5 years before his death. He's 39, so he was 34 when he gave the "I Have a Dream" speech, which is what most people know him from, but of course he was doing it. He started much earlier and then worked his way up. Okie doke. Yeah, I guess like in Mississippi, um, was using Confederate flags at football games and fraternity parties much earlier. The testimony of the student delegates and the use of the flag during the May meeting in Jackson contraindicated this explanation. Huh. The Old Miss students told a Birmingham newspaper that they were in Birmingham on serious business and not as college students on a lark. The University of Alabama student delegate told a reporter, "We're just here to protest. Every fraternity at Tuscaloosa is flying a Confederate flag from the roof today." The Confederate flag became a central motif for the subsequent analysis and discussion of the Birmingham Convention. Reports in African American newspapers invariably noted the presence of the flag and other Confederate and Old South symbols in the states' rights rebellion. Screaming frenzied, frightened, and comical, Dixie ran up the Confederate flag again here Saturday, 83 years later, after Lee hauled it down and handed it over to Grant at Appomattox. And those frantic Democrats bellowed their resistance to civil rights and their allegiance to the principles of the KKK, wrote the Pittsburgh Courier. Decrying the Dixiecrats' half-truth distortions of civil rights, the Birmingham World reported that the secessionists sported Confederate flags, pictures of Robert E. Lee, and various state standards as they paraded almost incessantly in the pandemonious, flooded auditorium. Huh. Interesting. Political action of humans is so strange. They walk around, they wave things. It's interesting that, like, feeling the euphoria that comes from agreeing with someone or finding a group of people that like agree with this thing that you are kind of self-conscious about but know is maybe somewhere deep inside yourself know is wrong. That idea is always interesting. Linkage between racism and the Confederate symbolism was already real for blacks. Yeah. Yes. It's just white people that seem to keep forgetting, or they keep on, like, making it about something else, something to change. Okay. The Venerable Chicago Defender chose as an obvious historical analogy for the Dixiecrats' retreat from Democratic Convention in Philadelphia. Yes, the obvious historical analogy of them. The rebels got as far as Gettysburg. The Confederate banner waved as again and again states' rights stormed the battlements. But human rights threw them back, beat them down to their knees, and when last seen, they were slinking back to Mississippi and Alabama. Okay, so the Chicago Defender, I think, is a very famous black newspaper for the West. Again, showcasing that, like, opportunities exist in the West where they don't in the East. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that. I mean, Boston is one of the major leaders of African American rights, but it's in the West. Again, the social rules aren't fully established as much yet, so you can get away with not get away with. You can enjoy certain freedoms in the West that the East has locked down in other ways. States' rights stormed the battlements, but human rights threw them back. Yes, okay, so they're just saying that the South has lost again at the Democratic Convention in Philadelphia, and they're retreating to their different delegation that they have. Conservative and liberal Southern white journalists debated the appropriateness of the Confederate flag and a Confederate mentality in the presidential campaign. Yes. William D. Workman, columnist for the Charleston News and Record, praised the appearance of the flag. The Confederate spirit was resurgent today, he wrote for Birmingham. The stars and bars were much in evidence, not by the tiny colors which appeared in frequency in Philadelphia, but big, bold battle flags of the Confederacy. Huh. Observing the same scene, Virginia Dabney of the Richmond Times-Dispatch whose editorials against the Dixiecrats earned him a Pulitzer Prize, denounced the Confederate flag waving as futile posturing in Alabama. The Dixiecrats, he warned, represented the worst caricatures of Southern politicians. Yeah, it's so interesting that, like, we have Southerners from this time period criticizing the Dixiecrat, like, Southern strategies. And it just, like, they keep doing it. They keep on being wrong in the face of everyone, and it's everyone else's problem now that they're like this. And now we have to clean up after them and record them and remember them. It's just so weird that, like, bad behavior is rewarded in some ways. Like, it genuinely is a time and place where you get attention, you get the currency that politics often is, which is attention and support, being famous. John Temple Graves of the Birmingham Post and Ralph McGill of the Atlanta Constitution fought a war of words over the flags and the Dixiecrats, mocking McGill's charge that Dixie was sung and Confederate flags were waved at the convention. Graves argued that Southernness did not preclude Americanism. Okay, so he's making the argument that Confederacy isn't un-American, when it definitionally is, because they didn't want to be a part of the United States. Maybe they want to be the Confederate States of America, right? That's a different America. This is a time for a proud Dixie singing, Confederate flag waving South that will stand up for all that's best of its own and do it in the spirit of no lost cause or secession, but of a new place to be won in our land of the free and home of the brave. Interesting. So they are aware of lost cause ideology, and they deny it. They deny no lost cause or secession, but they still reconvene at a different Democratic Party location in Birmingham. So, begging your cosmopolitan pardon, Ralph, I say 3 cheers for the red, white, and blue, and in Dixieland I'll take my stand. Wow, so just complete psychological, like, what's the word? The cognitive dissonance of in Dixieland I'll take my stand, which is, of course, for and about, like, one of the aspects of the Civil War. With emotion, McGill responded by not only reiterating his emphasis on the American political solution, but also condemning the political use of Confederate symbols. Then ask yourself if those who are trying to make us the Confederate flag, to make us take the Confederate flag with all its glory and honor and warp our minds and our politics and our political planning in those glorious folds, are being honest with the South and loyal to it. We must, he concluded, despise those who prostitute the Confederate flag and the song Dixie to their own uses. Okay, let's read that again. McGill responded by not only reiterating his emphasis on American political solutions, but also condemning the political use of Confederate symbols. And ask yourself if those who are trying to make us take the Confederate flag, all its glory and honor, and warp our minds and our politics and our political planning in those glorious folds. Warp our minds in those glorious folds, are being honest with the South and loyal to it. Mustang concluded, despise those who prostitute the Confederate flag and the song Dixie to their own uses. So he's saying that people are using the Confederate flag, misusing it, and taking its political power to be abused for their own private gain, which is, again, one of the criticisms that you can make about the Civil War, is that it's for the exclusive benefit of a small elite of slave-owning people at the direct expense of many poor Southern whites who couldn't afford slaves and didn't own slaves and still died for this war that basically didn't benefit them at all. Which is one of the reasons there's so many desertions in Southern Army. Okay, I might take a break. We've been doing this for 47 minutes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28. Actually, 26 pages left. Okay. I got through 8. Okie doke. I will see you guys later. And yeah, we'll pick up with part 2. Alright, bye.